But you asked, why are corporations, for example, bending the knee? And again, not all of them, some of them. And I think they are intimidated. They are afraid that the crazy aunt in the attic, that Trump will do something to come after them. But here's the thing, Nicole, it's very short-sighted.
Yeah.
It's very short-sighted. They are counting on the fact that the public won't remember, that the Democratic Party won't remember, that, the next president won't remember. And I think that's a grave miscalculation.
Hi again, everybody. It's now 5 o'clock in New York. Hold that thought in your mind for a moment as we evaluate one of the most egregious lies Donald Trump has ever inflicted on the American people, that he is, quote, the greatest friend that American capitalism has ever had. With such a great friend, as he says he is, forcibly insert himself into one of our planet's biggest business deals right now over what appears to be a very personal gripe. We'll let you decide. First, a little bit of background. You might be aware Netflix and Paramount are right now engaged in a high-stakes bidding war for another media company called Warner Brothers Discovery. These are massive, massive, powerful companies who own companies that you'd know and probably use. Tens of billions of dollars are at stake. Well, Donald Trump spent his Saturday night on social media, as he often does, inserting himself into all of this. And even more concerning, it had nothing to do with the business part of the deal, but instead with a gripe about one person in particular. That person is the person we showed you at the top of the hour, Susan Rice. She's the former ambassador to the United Nations. She's a former national security advisor, a former director of domestic policy. She served in the cabinets of 2 presidents. More recently, she serves on the board at Netflix. Remember, one of the suitors for Warner Brothers. So on Saturday night, Donald Trump reposted or promoted a social media post from a right-wing personality and insisted that Netflix should fire Susan Rice from its board, quote, immediately or pay the consequences, end quote. Remember, though, this is Donald Trump, who describes himself as, quote, the greatest friend that American capitalism has ever had, demanding that a business engaged in a high-stakes bidding war fire someone who did nothing more than exercise her First Amendment right to criticize him and his actions. In response, the CEO of Netflix, in an interview on BBC Radio 4, said this, quote, this is a business deal, not a political deal. Trump likes to do a lot of things on social media, end quote. And that's where we'll turn it back over to Susan Rice and let her finish her thought from earlier. Listen to what she said in our conversation late last month.
So I hope that more companies and leaders will take a deep breath and recognize that by playing the short game of appeasement, they're going to lose the long game of public trust and support. And they need to recognize that when you blow up our alliances, when you violate international law, when you undermine the full faith and credit of the United States, when you try to assault the independence of the Federal Reserve, you are taking actions that are bad for business and bad for American companies abroad.
That is where we begin the hour. NPR's media correspondent David Folkenflik is here. Also joining us, Princeton University professor, political analyst Eddie Glaude is back. And with me at the table in this wintry weather, writer and editor for Protect Democracy, Amanda Carpenter is here. And Puck News senior political columnist, national affairs analyst John Heilman is back. I love that snow couldn't keep you away, Heilman. I want to make clear one editorial piece. The comments that Laura Loomer and Trump posted were not the ones that I played. They were from another podcast. But Susan Rice is incredibly disciplined, and sort of the spirit of what she was saying was in the same vein.
Yeah, I think she was on with Preet, right?
On with Preet Bharara, yeah.
Yeah, and she said basically the same things. And, we were just on the show on Friday, right, talking about it's manifestly the case that that Donald Trump is not doing things that business prior to Donald Trump would have thought were good for business. They would never have the degree of industrial policy, the degree of intervention in from the regulatory standpoint, from some of the threats that he's made, some of the lawsuits he's filed, some of the ways he's kind of tried to tell companies to do X, Y, or Z in very individual kind of granular ways, are things that are so far outside both what what corporate America thinks is the way that the market should operate, and has always said that, and so far away from what Republicans in particular over the course of the history of the party has said about the try to keep the hand of the state out of business. So Susan Rice is speaking the language. She's not a person from the corporate sector, but she's speaking the language of the corporate sector. She's giving voice to all of those corporate CEOs, and that's why I mentioned the thing we talked about on Friday. All of those CEOs who have decided, for a variety of reasons, some short-term, some long-term, most of them entirely self-interested, a lot of them driven by fear or about the stock price or whatever, have decided we will not say what we have always said before and what we believe in our hearts about this kind of national socialism, which is what Trump has really been practicing with respect to the private sector. This is yet another example, and a particularly egregious example. And the fact that Trump is going after her for saying that, it makes it all the more kind of dark and ironic.
Yeah, and you know, the Trump piece of this is chapter 148. The sort of man bites dog part of it is a company that says, I don't know, he says a lot of stuff. This is a business decision, not a political one.
Yeah, I mean, it is absolutely pathetic that the leader of the free world is worrying about who is on the board of Netflix. And I had the same reaction to the Netflix CEO. He came out and said, he says a lot of stuff on social media. I'm doing a business deal, not a political deal. Donald Trump doesn't think so. He thinks all of these media deals are political deals, and he has had great success in getting what he wants by making statements like these, testing people to see what he can get away with. I mean, you look at what's happened with the Washington Post, CBS, we can go through it down the line. I saw this from the beginning when conservative outlets like the Weekly Standard were essentially murdered because they were insufficiently pro-Trump. I mean, this has been happening as part and parcel of the authoritarian takeover of the media in other spaces. But the idea that the Netflix...
The ABC deal.
Yeah,
I mean, and Trump,
the settlements, the law firm
and
settlements.
Trump views them as bribes. I mean,
Yes.
this also isn't sort of an analysis. This is how Trump sees them. I got this from ABC, then I got this from CBS.
Yeah, and still, these CEOs will act like, well, I'm above the fray. I can do business deals. You know, I always think back to what Charles Krauthammer said, who, he was a Harvard, highly trained. He could have had a great, brilliant career in medicine. But then people would ask him, why did you go into journalism? Why did you go into political writing? And he essentially said, politics is the essence of everything. This is how we do life. The fact that these CEOs think that they don't have to participate in that process, they are in the target zone of that process.
David, it may be too early to sort of project onto what Netflix is saying, what I hope that they're saying. So I'm going to ask you to sift through that. I mean, they seem to be saying we're sticking with Susan Rice. But it's also clear that they're trying to sort of shove this through a business sieve and not a political one. Where do you see their public posturing?
I think you're seeing Ted Sarandos trying to finesse this, not to do these grand gestures at some sort of loyalty or deference. And at the same time, you notice he didn't attack the president. He didn't slap him down. He just said, well, the president likes to say a lot in social media. This will be a business decision. He has tried very hard over the past months to court the president a bit, to warm relations between them so the president doesn't see them as some sort of hostile entity, and seemed to make some progress. Trump originally suggested that he would be helping to decide this, particularly because he's interested in the fate of who owns CNN. Netflix came in, made clear they don't want to own the cable channels owned by Warner Brothers Discovery. That's less threatening to Trump. And yet you also have in the wings this other family, right? You've got Larry Ellison, you've got David Ellison, people who have been very clear-cut about their desire to signal privately and publicly to the president and his circle, his camp, and his supporters that they're open for business. And Sarandos seems to be taking a different approach, that he thinks that somehow a certain kind of gentle private diplomacy without any great corporate gestures may nonetheless be able to get him by. And let's be clear, his consolidation of entertainment and Hollywood properties are enormous and do deserve to be reviewed carefully by antitrust regulators at the Justice Department and otherwise in the federal government. In some ways, the Paramount idea, which has not found favor with the leadership of Warner Brothers or to date to the shareholders, would be more of like with like. It's more identical overlap, but we'll see how that plays out.